Welcome to the channel Mirelle Tales. Before we start, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Now, let's get into today's story.
My husband moved his parents in with us. He told me he was going on a business trip to Frankfurt for 4 years. I saw him off at the airport, and right afterward, I froze his 6 platinum credit cards and filed for divorce, leaving his family in a state of shock. I had just said a tearful goodbye to my husband at JFK. He was leaving for Frankfurt for 4 years, supposedly for our future. The moment I was alone, I froze when an SMS notification buzzed on my phone, a $15,000 charge on my credit card for a diamond purchase at a luxury jewelry store on Madison Avenue. It turned out his Frankfurt was a 6-star resort in Miami, and the $100,000 we had earned through our hard work had vanished along with his young mistress. He left me with only 2 things. The first was a bottomless betrayal. The second was 2 fake in-laws who demanded I serve them as if I were their maid. A sudden summer thunderstorm in New York had left the air in our luxury high-rise apartment feeling damp and cool. I was standing by the large window watching raindrops hit the reinforced glass. A vague, indescribable unease was growing inside me. Behind me, the loud laughter of my in-laws and my husband shattered the usual silence of our home. Today was a special day. According to my husband Dan, he had personally driven to their small town in upstate New York early this morning to bring his parents to the city. George and Patricia had arrived loaded with gifts from the country, from a sack of potatoes to jars of homemade preserves and a dozen carefully packed free-range eggs. From the outside, it looked like an idyllic family reunion. But my intuition, honed over 7 years of marriage to Dan, told me something was off in his evasive gaze. Dinner was more lavish than usual. I'd left work early to make a pot roast and his favorite garlic mashed potatoes, which his parents also loved. Dan sat at the head of the table, pouring a Napa Valley Cabernet for his father with an overly radiant smile. He cleared his throat and set his glass down with a thud to get our attention. Mom, Dad, Emily. I brought you all here today to tell you something important. The company has decided to send a key employee to Frankfurt for advanced training and to manage the new branch for 4 years. It's a golden opportunity for me. When I come back, I could be promoted to vice president. The board has entrusted me with this mission, and I've accepted. I went cold. The fork nearly slipped from my hand. 4 years was an eternity, and he hadn't even mentioned it to me. I looked at him, trying to speak as calmly as possible. You're going to Frankfurt. For 4 years, why didn't you tell me anything about such a huge decision? Dan quickly took my hand. His eyes were filled with a guilt that still felt fake. Honey, please forgive me. The decision was made so quickly. The CEO called me, made the offer, and I had to accept on the spot, or someone else would have gotten it. I'm doing this for our family's future. I want us to be able to give you and our future children the best life possible when I get back. Buy a house in the suburbs, instead of being cramped in this condo. Patricia, upon hearing her son was going abroad, lit up with an indelible smile. She slapped her thigh and exclaimed in a voice that rose above the sound of the rain. Oh my God, what luck! Our family has worked their fingers to the bone for something like this. Our Danny. What a man. To Germany, to Europe itself. George, do you hear that? This is a proud day for our whole family. You go, son. Don't you worry. Emily will take care of the house. George nodded, raised his glass and took a satisfied sip. A man's got to see the world. You're doing the right thing, son. Your mother and I support you completely. Dan turned to me, squeezing my hand gently as if trying to reassure me, but his palm was cold as ice. He continued laying out what he called his perfect plan. Honey, I'm going far away, and I can't leave you all alone in the house, and I certainly can't leave my elderly parents upstate with no one to look after them. So I've thought of everything. For the 4 years I'm away, my parents will stay here and live with you. That way, they'll have company they can help you with the cooking, and you in turn can look after their health, fulfilling my duty as a son. You're such a caring and understanding wife. You won't let me down, will you? Dan's words were like an invisible noose tightening around my neck. He had backed me into a corner. If I refused, I'd be a selfish, petty daughter-in-law hindering her husband's career and refusing to care for his parents. But if I accepted, I faced the prospect of living under the same roof with my mother-in-law, who was famous for her difficult and demanding nature, while my husband was thousands of miles away. I glanced at Patricia and saw her scrutinizing me. I took a deep breath, trying to suppress the irritation building in my chest. I won't stand in the way of your career, but I think we should talk about your parents staying here for 4 years. They're used to the space of the countryside, and this is a condo. It's smaller. I'm afraid they won't be comfortable, and it could affect their health. Besides, I'm at work all day. I don't think I can give them the attention they deserve. Patricia's face instantly darkened. She slammed her plate on the table. Emily, what are you trying to say? Do you think we're a couple of dirty, messy country bumpkins? Or are you afraid we'll live off you? My son works his butt off to maintain this home. And now that he's leaving, he asks you to look after his parents, and you're already making excuses. And you call yourself a good wife and daughter-in-law. Dan quickly intervened, his voice sweet and calming, but his eyes held a hint of pressure. Mom, what are you saying? Emily didn't mean that. My wife is just worried you won't be comfortable. Honey, my parents are getting older. They're fine today, but tomorrow who knows? Leaving them alone upstate while I'm so far away. I wouldn't be able to work with a clear conscience. If you love me, help me with this. Think of it as helping me carry this family burden so I can focus on my career. I promise I'll send you my entire salary from over there. Buy whatever you want. Spend it on anything you like. Hearing him talk about money and responsibility, I knew I couldn't refuse right there in front of his parents. I had to nod reluctantly, a heavy weight settling in my heart. All right, if you've already decided everything and your parents want to stay, I agree. I just ask that you be understanding if I do something wrong. Dan sighed in relief, poured his father more wine, and began describing a bright future, a lakeside house, trips to Europe for the whole family. The laughter returned, but I just sat there, chewing on rice that tasted bitter. Looking at Dan, the man I had shared a bed with for so many years, I suddenly felt he had become a stranger. Why was he in such a hurry to leave? Why couldn't he look me in the eye while talking about the trip? My intuition told me that something dark was hidden behind that perfect picture, but I couldn't figure out what it was. Dinner ended. As I cleared the kitchen, the loud blare of the TV and my mother-in-law's cackles came from the living room. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Dan step out onto the balcony to take a call. He spoke in a low, secretive voice, covering his mouth with his hand. I wanted to approach, but he had already finished the call and returned to the room with a forced smile. That night, Dan slept soundly while I tossed and turned, listening to the monotonous patter of the rain and my husband's snores. Unanswered questions swirled in my head. The next morning, an air of farewell hung over the apartment. Curiously, Dan was the most emotional one, not me. He woke up very early, checked his suitcase again, and put on a sharp suit. His parents had been up at dawn to cook him a hearty breakfast to give him strength for the long journey. Patricia wouldn't let go of her son's hand, giving him endless advice through her tears, from eating well and staying warm to being wary of strangers in a foreign country. Emily, can you drive me to the airport? Dan asked, checking his watch. Good, the flight is at 1:00 a.m. It's about time to go. Silently, I grabbed my purse and car keys. On the way to JFK, Dan kept holding my hand, whispering the sweetest words. You'll have a tough time at home, honey. I'll video call you as soon as I land. Please take care of yourself. Don't work yourself to exhaustion. And if my parents complain about anything, just be the bigger person. Do it for me, okay? I mumbled in agreement, my eyes fixed on the road. Inside, there was no sadness about the separation, only a vast emptiness and exhaustion. The car stopped at the International Departures Terminal. Dan hugged me tightly, gave me a loud kiss on the forehead, and grabbing his suitcase, walked inside, repeatedly turning to wave goodbye with a radiant smile. I watched his back disappear through the automatic doors. I was supposed to cry, or at least feel a pang in my heart, but I didn't. I only felt relief, as if a great weight had been lifted. At the same time, the unease from the day before returned with greater force. Back in the car, I started the engine, ready to head to the office. Suddenly, my phone vibrated in my purse. I glanced at the screen. A message from the bank, probably an annual fee charge or some kind of ad. I almost ignored it, but my professional habits made me check the phone. The lines of the message that appeared on the screen made me pull over to the shoulder and slam on the brakes. My heart pounded as if it wanted to burst out of my chest. From the additional card associated with your account, a transaction of $15,000 has been made at a luxury jewelry store on Madison Avenue. I rubbed my eyes and reread the message 5 times. $15,000. A huge sum. And the location, Madison Avenue. The epicenter of luxury in the heart of New York. My head was spinning. I had gotten that additional card for Dan for business expenses and emergencies. He had told me he was checking in for his flight to Frankfurt. So why, at that very moment, had a charge been made from his card at a jewelry store in Midtown Manhattan? There were two possibilities. The first, his card had been stolen or cloned. The second, he wasn't at the airport. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down. My experience in stressful situations had taught me not to panic. I dialed the bank's customer service number. My voice was cold and decisive, without a hint of a tremor. "Good morning. I am the primary holder of card number. I just received a notification for a large transaction that I suspect is fraudulent. I demand that you immediately freeze all cards associated with this account, both the primary and all additional ones." The operator confirmed my details and executed the request instantly. After hanging up, I sat in the car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. If his card had been stolen, Dan would have called me immediately. But my phone remained silent. I tried calling him. "The number you have dialed is switched off or out of the coverage area." He had turned off his phone, which was consistent with being about to board a plane. But what about the transaction? No thief would be so brazen as to go to a luxury store and spend $15,000 on jewelry. There are cameras everywhere. A terrible idea crept into my mind. Dan had lied to me. He wasn't going to Frankfurt. He was in New York, and he had spent that money on diamonds for someone else. I remembered his evasive gaze the night before the secret phone call on the balcony and his haste that morning. All the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together into a terrifying picture. I didn't go to the office. I turned the car around and headed downtown. I needed to find out the truth. But on the way, I realized I couldn't just show up at the store and demand to see the security footage. They wouldn't give it to a private citizen. I parked near a quiet coffee shop and ordered a black coffee, no sugar. The bitterness helped me focus. I opened the banking app on my phone and reviewed the transaction history. Besides that enormous sum, I discovered several smaller charges over the last week at restaurants and women's clothing stores I had never been to. A woman's intuition is never wrong. I had been deceived. A grand, cruel deception. My husband, the man I shared my life with, had staged a perfect play to fool me. He had left his elderly parents in my care while he was off having fun somewhere with the money we had earned with our sweat. Hot, salty tears welled up in my eyes, but I quickly wiped them away. Crying was useless now. I needed proof. I needed to know exactly where Dan was and what he was doing. I thought of Kevin, my best friend from college, who now worked in cybersecurity and had a lot of contacts. I called him. "Kevin, it's Emily. Can you help me with something urgent? I need to locate and track someone's movements. It's a matter of life or death for me." On the other end of the line, Kevin understood the gravity of the situation from my voice and agreed immediately. I hung up, watching the busy traffic outside the window. Yesterday's rain had stopped, and the sun was out, but a storm had just broken in my soul. I wasn't going to let this go. If Dan had dared to betray me, he was going to pay dearly. I returned home after dark. The apartment bore no trace of the morning's laughter. Instead, an oppressive atmosphere hung in the air. As soon as I walked in, I saw an incredible mess. Chip bags and beer cans were scattered all over the living room floor, dirty glasses on the coffee table, the TV blaring some obnoxious reality show. My father-in-law was asleep on the sofa, his feet on the armrest, snoring loudly, and my mother-in-law was rummaging through the fridge. Seeing me, Patricia didn't ask if I was tired from work. Instead, she slammed the refrigerator door shut and snapped at me reproachfully. "And where have you been? Your father and I are starving here. Dinner's not made." "Did you decide to starve us to death?" Two old people. I glanced at the clock. It was only 6:30 p.m. I was usually just leaving work at this time. Suppressing my irritation, I put my purse on a chair and replied calmly, "I just got home from work, Mom. There's rice, pasta, everything in the kitchen. You could have started something." Patricia shot me a glare, put her hands on her hips, and stepped toward me. "Oh, so you've gotten smart now, have you? Your husband is barely gone and you're already showing your claws. I'm your mother-in-law. I came here to rest, to enjoy the fruits of my son's labor, not to be your servant. My son works himself to the bone to keep this house, and all you have to do is look after his parents and you're already complaining." I looked her straight in the eye, unflinching. I used to tolerate it to keep the peace out of respect for Dan. But now, knowing he had deceived me, my respect for this family had evaporated. "You're right, Mom. I also work and earn money, and half of this condo was bought with my funds. I'm not asking you to be my servant, but I'm not your maid either." Patricia's jaw dropped, probably not expecting such a response from me. She was about to scream, but I stopped her with a gesture. "I'm tired, and I don't want to argue. But since we're going to be living together for a long time, I think we need to set some ground rules to avoid conflict. I went to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, drank it in one gulp, and returned to the living room where my father-in-law had woken up and was watching the scene bewildered. I said clearly, "First food. I work all day and can only make dinner. Breakfast and lunch are on you. I'll buy the groceries and leave them in the fridge. Whoever eats cleans up after themselves. Dishes are washed immediately, not piled up in the sink." Patricia shrieked, "How dare you?" I didn't let her finish and continued. "Second cleaning. We have hardwood floors. You need to be careful not throw trash on the floor. Everyone cleans their own room, and without my permission, no one enters my bedroom." And finally, I emphasized each word. Third, respect for personal space. I come home from work tired. I need to rest. I ask you to speak more quietly and turn down the TV volume after 10 p.m. Patricia's face turned red with anger. She turned to George and yelled, "See, do you see how your daughter-in-law is walking all over us? Danny's barely out the door and his wife is already kicking his parents out." Oh God, what a cross to bear. George scowled too, his voice becoming deeper and more authoritarian. "Emily, aren't you ashamed of yourself? We are your elders, and you, the younger one, should respect us. Who are you to set conditions? This house belongs to my son, and we will live here as we please." I smiled bitterly. "Dad, the deed to this condo is in both our names. My parents provided half the money for the down payment. The other half Dan and I paid with a mortgage. Dan is gone. I am the owner of this house. I just want us all to live by some rules so that I have the strength to work and pay the mortgage. If you don't like it, you can always go back upstate. There's more space there." My words were like a bucket of cold water. They knew perfectly well that in their small town there was no central air, no comfortable bed like here. Patricia fell silent, but her eyes were filled with hatred. Fine, you'll see. I'm going to call Danny. We'll see how he disciplines his wife." She grabbed her phone and frantically started dialing Dan's number. But of course, on the other end, there were only dial tones or the message that he was unavailable. I watched her try to contact him in vain and smiled to myself. Your son is having fun with his mistress right now. He has no time for your complaints. I didn't make dinner that night. I went to my room and locked the door. From outside, I could hear my mother-in-law's shouts and the clatter of dishes. I put on my headphones, played some instrumental music, and tried to shut out the chaos. I had to save my strength. This war had just begun, and I was going to be the victor. The first night without my husband, I didn't feel lonely. I felt stronger than ever. I told myself, Emily, you can't be weak. You have to protect yourself and what is yours. The next morning, I got up earlier than usual. I did my makeup, carefully chose an elegant navy blue pantsuit, and put on the blazer to look more serious. As I left my room, I ignored my mother-in-law's malicious glare as she chewed on toast at the table and headed for the door. Today, I wasn't going to the office, but to a meeting with my lawyer, Mr. Harrison. Michael Harrison's office was on the 11th floor of a discreet office building. He was an old acquaintance of mine, known for his sharp mind and dedication. I placed a folder with the bank statements I had printed that morning on his desk. Please, look at this. Is there any way to trace this money? Mr. Harrison, adjusting his glasses, took the folder and began to examine the documents carefully. The office was silent, broken only by the rustle of paper. 15 minutes later, he looked up. His face was serious. Emily, the situation is more complicated than you think. My associates have reviewed these transactions. Over the last 6 months, your husband has transferred in small increments, a total of $100, 000, to the account of a one Sofia Jimenez, $100, 000. The words sounded like thunder on a clear day. My ears were ringing. It was all our savings from 7 years together, plus the profits from some investments I had worked so hard to build. We had agreed that at the end of the year we would buy a townhouse with that money. And now, Sofia Jimenez. The name was familiar. I searched my memory. Of course, Sofia, an intern at Dan's company 2 years ago, I had seen her once at a company dinner, a young girl with a sweet southern accent and dewy eyes that looked like they were always on the verge of tears. Back then, she was always hovering around Dan, calling him Mr. Daniel with devotion. I had even praised her for her politeness, never suspecting I was nursing a viper. Mr. Harrison continued his analysis. His voice was calm, but every word was a stab to my heart. The transfers were done very cleverly. $5, 000 here. $10, 000 there. The memo line always said, payment for goods, purchase of materials. If you don't look at the whole picture, it's very hard to notice. This Sophia is 24 years old. She's from a small town in Georgia. Officially, she's unemployed, but 2 months ago, she bought a luxury apartment in Barcelona in her name. I clenched my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms. Dan had been planning this for a long time. He had been siphoning off our shared assets to build a love nest with his mistress. $100, 000. My sweat, my tears, my sleepless nights at work, the little luxuries I had denied myself, and he had gone and given it all to another woman. What do I do now, Mr. Harrison? I can't just lose that money like this. He looked at me with compassion. Right now, you need to stay calm. We have proof of the fund movements, but to recover them, we need to prove they were marital assets and that the transfers were made without your consent for the purpose of concealment. I will help you draft the divorce petition and a motion for a temporary restraining order to freeze his assets. But first, you need to find out exactly where Dan is right now. I nodded. The fire of hatred burned in my eyes. I'll find him. Thank you. Leaving the lawyer's office, I sat in my car with a lump in my throat. I watched the flow of people on the street, each with their own rushes, their own lives. How many other women like me had been deceived? I remembered Dan's sweet words. I'm doing it all for our family. I love you more than anyone. They turned out to be just empty words. I opened my phone and looked at our wedding photo, my wallpaper. In the photo, Dan was smiling, holding my hand tightly. Now looking at it, I only felt disgust. I changed the wallpaper to a black screen. As of today, Dan was dead to me. All that was left was an enemy named Daniel Miller. I went to his company. I had to talk to his boss. The show titled Business Trip to Frankfurt had to end. I wanted to see what would be left of Dan when his mask was torn off. Dan's office was in a modern glass building. I walked into the lobby, taking a deep breath to compose myself. I hadn't come to make a scene. I had come as a concerned wife worried about her husband's well-being. The perfect cover to unmask a lie. The receptionist recognized me and smiled. Good morning, Emily. Here to see Mr. Miller. He's on vacation. I returned a polite, restrained smile. I know. I'm here to see the director, Jessica, about a personal matter. I have an appointment. I lied. I had no appointment, but as the wife of a department head, I was sure Jessica would spare me a few minutes. I went up to the director's office and knocked on the door. Hearing come in, I entered. Jessica bent over some documents, took off her glasses, surprised to see me. Oh, Emily, what brings you here? Has something happened? Sit down, have some water. I sat across from her, my hands in my lap, trying to look as naive as possible. Good morning, Jessica. I'm sorry for the unexpected visit. It's just that my husband Dan left for Frankfurt yesterday in such a hurry that in all the chaos I forgot to ask him for the exact address to send him some medication. He left so quickly, and I guess he hasn't gotten a German phone yet. I can't reach him. I came to see if you could give me the contact details for the Frankfurt branch. Jessica looked at me, her eyes wide with astonishment. She frowned and asked as if she couldn't believe her ears. What Frankfurt? Are you telling me? Dan went to Frankfurt. Now it was my turn to feign surprise. Yes. He told me the company was sending him for advanced training and to manage the branch there for 4 years. He left yesterday at 10 a.m. Jessica laughed, but her laugh held both bewilderment and seriousness. Emily, are you sure about what you're saying? Our company doesn't have a branch in Frankfurt, and even if there were some project, Dan wouldn't be going. Just yesterday, he submitted a vacation request for 2 weeks. In the request, he specified that his wife was gravely ill, and he needed to be home to care for her and then take her to a clinic in Switzerland for treatment. I froze as if a bucket of ice water had been dumped on me. His wife is gravely ill. He had dared to use my health, my life, as an alibi for his amusements. He had cursed me to get a vacation and have fun with his mistress. Rage boiled inside me, but I held it back, feigning only shock and immense grief. I said in a trembling voice, "Are you serious?" He said his wife was sick. But I'm perfectly healthy. I go to work every day. Why would he say something like that? Jessica was a sharp woman. Seeing my reaction and the inconsistencies in Dan's stories, she began to suspect what was happening. She stood up, walked around her desk, and patted my shoulder. Emily, calm down. I can officially confirm that there has been no decision to send Dan to Frankfurt. The fact that he lied to you and to the company is a serious breach of professional ethics. Are you sure he got on a plane? I nodded. Tears streamed down my face. This time they were real tears of humiliation. I took him to the airport myself. But this morning I discovered that his credit card was used to buy jewelry here in New York. Jessica, he's cheated me. He's cheated me and his elderly parents. Jessica sighed and shook her head. What a scumbag. I never would have expected this from him. Don't worry, I'll order a full review of all his work and documentation before his duties are transferred. If he's dared to defraud the company as well, I won't let it slide. And you handle your family matters calmly. If you need help with any documents, don't hesitate to ask. I whispered a few words of thanks and said goodbye. As I left the director's office, I saw that the New York sky had turned gray. It was all crystal clear. No business trip, no bright future, just a despicable husband, a professional liar who was spending my money building castles in the air with another woman. Dan himself had burned all the bridges. He thought I was a foolish housewife who only knew how to nod in agreement. He was wrong. When a woman is cornered, her counterattack is stronger than any storm. I took out my phone and called my lawyer. Mr. Harrison, begin. I want to freeze everything. I want him left without a single cent in his pocket. Let's see how long his true love with that girl lasts. I walked away. The echo of my heels on the marble floor sounded cold and determined. The game had just begun. The next morning, I arrived at the office in a completely different state of mind. If before I was constantly thinking about what to make for dinner, whether my husband would like it or if my in-laws would be offended, now all my thoughts were focused on a single goal: work and my plan for revenge. I wore an exquisite white suit, painted my lips a bolder red than usual, and walked into the conference room with the demeanor of a general. Today I had an important meeting with foreign partners to close the contract for the next quarter, a project I had poured my soul into. The meeting was tense. I was by the whiteboard analyzing market strategy when my phone on the table began to vibrate non-stop. I glanced at the screen. It was my mother-in-law. I declined the call, turned the phone face down, and continued with the presentation. But a minute later, the phone vibrated again and again. Patricia called 5 times in a row. The partners looked at me with sympathy. I smiled, apologized, and asked for permission to step out to answer, fearing something urgent had happened at home. The moment I answered, my mother-in-law's shrill scream pierced my ear, echoing down the empty hallway. Emily, come home right now. Your father is in a bad way. He's going to die. He fell. He's foaming at the mouth. Come quick. Take him to the hospital. I'm old and weak. I can't lift him." Patricia's voice was high-pitched. She sounded like she was panicking. But even so, I noticed a hint of exaggeration. If George were really as bad as she described, the first thing to do would be to call an ambulance, not his daughter-in-law who was working miles away. Calmly and coldly, I asked, "What's wrong with Dad? Mom, where is he?" Patricia screamed even louder. "Here on the floor. His blood pressure shot up, I'm sure. You're such a heartless daughter-in-law. Your husband is gone. You have to take his place, take care of his parents, come immediately." I looked at the clock. From my office to home was at least a 4-5-minute drive without traffic. And now it was rush hour, so over an hour. If my father-in-law really had a stroke by the time I got there, he'd be long gone. But I remembered that in the morning before I left, George was sitting drinking tea and had eaten 2 full bowls of oatmeal. He looked rosy and healthy. Besides, the box of blood pressure pills I had bought him was untouched. He never forgot to take them in the morning. I understood immediately what this was. It was another one of their tricks to make me rush home, or simply for Patricia to sabotage my work, to demonstrate her power that at her call, I must appear. She wanted me to leave an important meeting and run home like a madwoman, only to find her husband complaining and asking for some chicken soup. I took a deep breath and decided not to give in. I said clearly into the phone, "Mom, listen to me calmly. I'm in a very important meeting with the CEO. I can't leave for a single minute. If I leave now, I'll lose my job, and therefore the money we all live on." Patricia was about to unleash a string of curses, but I cut her off. "Don't worry, I'll handle everything. I'm going to call 911 right now. They'll send a team directly to the house. They're professionals. They have oxygen stretchers. They'll give Dad first aid and get him to the hospital quickly. You stay home and wait for the paramedics." With that, I hung up without giving her time to react. I immediately dialed 911, gave the address, and described the patient's condition just as my mother-in-law had told me. Of course, I emphasized all the dangerous symptoms so they would arrive faster. Then I returned to the conference room. I smiled, apologized, and finished my presentation brilliantly. About 20 minutes later, my phone vibrated again. This time it was an unknown number, probably from the paramedics. I stepped out again. "Hello, are you a relative of the patient George Miller?" "This is EMS. We've arrived at the address provided, but no one is answering the door." We called the landline, someone answered, saying we had the wrong number, and hung up. I smiled to myself. Just as I thought. A performance. Seeing the ambulance with its flashing lights at the door, Patricia must have panicked, afraid to open up and have her deception exposed and have to pay for the call. I responded to the medic with feigned concern in my voice. "Oh, the poor thing. My mother-in-law must have gotten so nervous she got confused. Sir, please insist. Tell them it was me, the daughter-in-law, who called you. If they don't open up, ask the doorman to help you open the door. Maybe my father-in-law is dying in there." I knew my mother-in-law perfectly. The thing she feared most in the world was losing face in front of the neighbors and spending money unnecessarily. And indeed, 5 minutes later, Patricia called me back. Her voice was low and pleading no trace of the earlier aggression. "Emily, there's no need for an ambulance. Your father is better now. It was just a little low blood sugar. I gave him a glass of sugar water and he's recovered. Tell them to leave. They're making a scene in the whole building." "The neighbors will laugh at us," I replied coldly. "What do you mean, Mom? You told me he was foaming at the mouth and on the floor. You don't play with the health of the elderly. I've already paid for the call and the ambulance services. The paramedics are already there. Let them examine him for our peace of mind. If something happens to Dad, I'd never forgive myself." I flatly refused to cancel the call. In the end, Patricia had to open the door and let the paramedics in, who, in the presence of the doorman and a few curious neighbors, took George's blood pressure and pulse. The result, he was perfectly healthy. Normal blood pressure vitals, like a young man's. The medics scolded them for the false alarm and waste of resources. Patricia had no choice but to pay for the ambulance service, embarrassed and reluctant. That evening, I returned from work. The apartment was deathly silent. George was watching TV with a sullen expression. Patricia, seeing me, only shot me a look of hatred but didn't dare to scream or insult me as before. She had understood that I was no longer the submissive daughter-in-law she could manipulate at will. I had used her own overacting to teach her a lesson in honesty. I went to my room, changed, and then went to the kitchen to make myself some instant soup. I didn't ask about my father-in-law's health. I already knew he was healthier than I was. My cold attitude was a silent declaration of war. The manipulations through illness were over. From that day on in that house, everything would be done by my rules. On the third day after Dan's departure, I met Kevin at our favorite coffee shop in the West Village. Kevin had arrived early and was sitting in a secluded corner with a serious face. He had been my best friend since college and was the only person I could trust right now. As a cybersecurity expert, he knew how to find information on social media and in databases inaccessible to ordinary people. As soon as I sat down, Kevin silently slid a tablet toward me. On the screen was a clear, enlarged photo. A friend of mine happened to take this yesterday morning at Miami International Airport. He saw this couple. They were being overly affectionate, and the guy's face looked familiar, so he snapped a picture just in case. Take a good look. Holding my breath, I stared at the photo. There was no doubt. The man in the picture, wearing a loud Hawaiian shirt, white shorts, and a hat, was Dan. My husband. He looked nothing like a businessman on a work trip to Frankfurt. Beside him, a young woman in a suggestive backless dress clung to his arm, smiling from ear to ear. It was Sophia, the intern. They were at the reception of a lavish 6-star resort in South Beach. Dan's hand was firmly around her waist, and her hand rested possessively on his chest. But what made my blood boil wasn't their embrace, but the shiny object on Sophia's left wrist. I zoomed in as far as I could. On her thin white wrist, a Rolex Datejust with a diamond-encrusted face sparkled. I remembered how a month earlier Dan had come home bragging about receiving a huge bonus for a project. He said he wanted to buy a good watch to project a more serious image in client meetings. At the time I believed him, I was even happy for him. It turned out that with our shared money, he had bought 2 matching watches. One he wore himself, and the other a lady's Rolex I had dreamed of. But he never bought me to avoid splurging, now adorned his mistress's wrist. My eyes blurred with rage. The feeling of betrayal and humiliation overwhelmed me. Dan wasn't just cheating on me. He was giving the best, most valuable parts of our family to another woman. Kevin looked at me with concern. Emily, are you okay? I found something else. They've booked a sea view villa at the Setai for 7 days. The price per night is $5,000. The reservation is under the name Daniel Miller. $5,000 a night. 7 nights was $35,000. Plus the business class tickets, the food, the gifts. That trip cost almost $50,000. And at home, my mother-in-law haggled with me over every bunch of parsley. Dan constantly complained about difficulties at the company, about bonuses being cut to give me less money for the household. And all the while, he was throwing money around with his mistress. I wiped my tears and looked at Kevin with determination. I'm fine. Thank you so much, Kevin. This photo and the reservation info are golden evidence for the trial. Kevin nodded. I've saved all the data, including a post she made on Instagram with the geolocation. She made it for her close friends. But I managed to access it. She's bragging that her future husband organized an early honeymoon for her. Future husband. Honeymoon. The words were like salt in a wound. What had Dan promised her? That he would come back and divorce his old wife to marry her. That I was a foolish housewife taking care of the house. While he had fun, I clenched my fists so hard, my nails dug into my palms to keep from losing my fisted mind. All right, Dan. You want to play millionaire at a resort? I'll show you what a fake millionaire is. Now you're in paradise, but I'm going to make you descend into hell immediately. I turned to Kevin. Help me with one more thing. Keep a close eye on all their social media movements. I'm going to see Mr. Harrison right now. It's time to turn off the tap. I stood up and smoothed my clothes. The initial pain had transformed into strength. I was no longer the docile, submissive wife. I was Emily, a talented marketing director, and I would use my cold, calculating mind to get justice. That photograph would be Dan's one-way ticket out of my life, and he would leave with empty hands. In Mr. Harrison's office today, things were busy, but he still prioritized my case. I laid out all the recent evidence Kevin and I had gathered on his desk, the photo from Miami, the hotel reservation information, and the statement for the Rolex purchase on Madison Avenue just before his flight. The lawyer examined each document carefully and nodded with satisfaction. Excellent, Emily. With this evidence, we have more than enough grounds to petition the court for a temporary restraining order. Dan's actions clearly indicate an attempt to conceal assets. The transfer of $100,000 to Sophia and the luxury expenses under the guise of a business trip are solid legal grounds. I sat across from him, my back straight. My voice didn't tremble. Mr. Harrison, I want to file a unilateral divorce petition today, and I want the court to order a freeze on all bank accounts in Daniel Miller's name, including his payroll and investment accounts, and to place a lien on his Mercedes to prevent any sale. Mr. Harrison looked at me with a mix of compassion and respect. Emily, have you thought this through? Once the petition is filed and the freeze is executed, there's no going back. Your marital relationship will effectively end even if it takes a while legally. I smiled bitterly. Going back. He closed every escape route for me. The moment he got on that plane to Miami with her. I have no regrets. I only regret the effort I invested in this farce of a family. Do everything as quickly as possible. I want his cards to become useless plastic by this afternoon or tomorrow morning at the latest. The lawyer nodded and immediately called his assistant to draft the documents. I sat there watching as the lines appeared on the computer screen. Petition for dissolution of marriage motion for temporary restraining order. Cold legal formulas that were now my weapons. We worked non-stop for 3 hours to finalize the documents. I signed the petition with decision and firmness. My signature had never looked so beautiful and free. It was the signature of liberation. Afterward, Mr. Harrison and I went to the courthouse to file the documents. Thanks to the meticulous preparation and the urgency of the case, as well as the high risk of asset concealment, the judge processed the case very quickly. We posted the necessary bond, a mandatory procedure for freezing accounts. I paid from my personal savings without hesitation. By the end of the day, the court order was issued a document with a red seal ordering all corresponding banks to freeze Daniel Miller's accounts. Another copy was sent to the DMV to prohibit any action on his Mercedes. Holding that order in my hands, I felt as if a mountain had been lifted off my shoulders. The financial flow was cut off. Dan could no longer withdraw another cent from our shared assets to satisfy his mistress. I left the courthouse. The evening sun cast a red glow on the courtyard tiles. I called Kevin. It's all set. The net is cast. Now we just wait for the fish to bite. On the other end of the line, Kevin laughed cheerfully. Perfect. I bet there's a storm brewing in Miami tonight. And you go get some rest. Gather your strength for the battle with the two old folks at home. At the mention of my in-laws, I winced, but I no longer feared them. I held all the cards. The condo I lived in was legally in both our names, but the majority of the down payment was a gift from my parents. I would not allow them to continue camping out in my territory. I drove home feeling like a victor. Dan, did you think you were the smartest? Did you think you could cheat on me and enjoy life? You were wrong. When a woman's love runs out, she becomes more ruthless than any man. Enjoy your last luxury dinner tonight because tomorrow you'll be a pauper in the most literal sense of the word. I got home well after dark. As soon as I walked in, I was hit by a strong smell of food. The living room looked like a battlefield. Empty beer cans, gnawed chicken bones directly on the coffee table. The TV was blaring club music. George was sitting on the sofa with his feet on the armrest, smoking a cigarette. Ash was falling directly onto my expensive hardwood floor. Patricia was lying on the other sofa, scrolling on her phone and laughing loudly. When they saw me, they didn't even greet me or bother to clean up. Patricia looked me up and down and said mockingly, Well, the director is home. Since you didn't make dinner, you decided to starve your husband's parents. We had to order a rotisserie chicken. So much money wasted. I didn't answer. I walked over, silently, turned off the TV, and then snatched the cigarette from George's hands and stubbed it out in an ashtray. What are you doing, you rude woman? George roared, his face turning red. I stood in the middle of the room and looked at them with a coldness as sharp as a razor blade. I'm sorry, Dad, but there's no smoking inside this house. I told you that on the first day. And today I have an important announcement for you. I took a piece of paper from my bag and threw it forcefully onto the table next to the chicken bones. It was a notice drafted by Mr. Harrison, but which I had rewritten in simpler language. This is a notice to vacate. I demand that you pack your things and leave this apartment within 3 days. The air froze. Patricia's mouth fell open. Her eyes looked like they were about to pop out of their sockets. What did you say? Are you kicking us out? This house belongs to my son. What right do you have? Have you gone crazy? I smiled. This house is in both our names, but 90% of the money for its purchase came from my parents. Dan only contributed a small portion financed by a mortgage that I am now paying. Dan has left with another woman taking all our savings. I have no obligation to support and serve my husband's parents while he is having fun with someone else. George jumped up, pointing a trembling finger at me. You're slandering him. Danny went to Frankfurt to bring honor to our family name. And you unfaithful wife, have decided to take the house from your husband. I'm going to call Dan. He'll put you in your place. I calmly took out my phone, opened the photo of Dan and Sophia in Miami, and held it in front of their faces. Look closely. Is this your son's Frankfurt? This is Miami, and this girl is his mistress. He lied about the business trip to take his mistress to a resort, spend a fortune, and leave his wife at home taking care of his parents. What do you think of that? Patricia snatched the phone from me. Her gaze was fixed on the photograph. She immediately recognized her son and the young beauty beside him. Her face went from red to pale, but the blind instinct to protect her son took over. She threw the phone at me and screamed, Photoshop. This is photoshopped, I'm sure of it. You made it all up out of jealousy. My son is a good, decent man. He would never do something like this. And even if he did go on vacation, so what? A man can have several women. It's your fault for not knowing how to keep your husband, and now you dare to kick his parents out. I shook my head in pity. Even now, they were justifying his actions. My patience had run out. Believe what you want. The truth is still the truth. I have filed for divorce. The court has already ordered a freeze on Dan's assets. And as for this condo, I am the legal owner. I'm giving you 3 days. If you haven't left by then, I will call building security and a city marshal to have your things removed. Don't complain then. With that, I turned and went to my bedroom, locking the door. Behind me, I heard Patricia's screams and curses, and George throwing furniture. They called Dan non-stop. I heard Patricia shouting into the phone, Son, pick up the phone. Your wife is kicking us out onto the street. But the answer was the silence of an unavailable subscriber. Or maybe Dan was too busy with his mistress to answer that night. I stayed awake listening to their laments, but in my soul there was not a shred of doubt. Misplaced kindness is foolishness. I had been foolish for too long. It was time to put my life in order, and I had to start by evicting the unworthy people from my home. In 3 days, peace would reign in this apartment again. It might be empty, but at least it would be clean. Only later, when everything had calmed down, did I learn the details of that fateful night in Miami. a night that Dan would surely remember for the rest of his life. That evening in a five-star restaurant on the ocean front at the Setai, the atmosphere was romantic. Candles, flowers, the murmur of the waves. Dan and Sophia were enjoying a luxury dinner of lobster wagyu steak and expensive red wine. Dan wore an elegant white suit. Sophia, a spectacular evening gown with a pearl necklace. They toasted to their happy future, in which Dan would divorce his wife and marry Sophia. When the dinner came to an end, the waiter brought the bill $1.200. Dan smiled smugly, took his platinum credit card from his wallet, and placed it with an important gesture in the folder. He turned to Sophia, whispering sweet promises of a morning shopping for designer bags in her ear. 5 minutes later, the waiter returned, looking bewildered. Leaning in, he said in a low voice, "Excuse me, sir. Your card has been declined. The terminal is giving an error. The payment won't process. Could you check it or use another card?" Dan frowned. He was embarrassed in front of his date. "You must have a problem with your terminal. This card has a $100,000 limit. What error could there be?" "Well, try this one." Dan pulled out another card, a Visa Platinum from another bank. The waiter left and returned again, shaking his head apologetically. "That one isn't working either, sir. The card has been blocked by the issuing bank." At that moment, Dan began to sweat. He rummaged through his entire wallet, pulling out all his cards, debit, credit, 5 cards, and all 5 came back with transaction denied or temporary block messages. The smile on Sophia's face vanished. Suspicion appeared in her eyes. Diners around them began to whisper and cast sidelong glances. "Such a distinguished-looking customer, and he can't pay for dinner," the restaurant manager approached. He was still polite, but there was a firmness in his voice. "Mr. Miller, the system is informing us that all your cards are invalid. We must ask you to settle the bill in cash or by wire transfer. Furthermore, we've just received a notification from reception that the credit card you used to guarantee the payment for your room for 7 nights has also been declined. The total amount due at this moment, including the stay and dinner, is $36,500. If you cannot pay immediately, we will be forced to ask you to leave the resort and call security." Dan's face turned beet red. With trembling hands, he took out his phone to make a transfer through the app, but unfortunately a cold message appeared on the screen. "Your account has been frozen by court order." At that moment in my NYC apartment, the phone rang. It was the hotel manager. Since the card Dan had booked with was an additional one on my account in case of a problem, they contacted the primary cardholder. "Hello. Am I speaking with Mrs. Emily Miller? We're calling from the Setai in Miami. Your husband, Mr. Miller, is having some trouble with his payment." I listened and then replied calmly, loud enough for Dan if the manager had put it on speaker, and I was sure he had to hear me. "Good morning. Yes, it was I who asked the bank to block the cards. We are in the process of a divorce, and I have filed a complaint for concealment of assets. I am not responsible for any of his expenses nor those of his mistress. Please proceed according to the law. If he doesn't pay, call the police and have him taken away." I hung up. On the other end of the line in Miami, Dan heard my voice coming from the manager's phone. His face turned as white as paper. Sophia, sitting next to him, clearly heard the words "divorce and police" and jumped up in terror. "Dan, what does all this mean? You told me you were separated and getting divorced soon. Why did she block your cards?" "You lied to me." Dan, stammering, tried to hold her back. "Sophia, honey, calm down. It's just my wife playing a dirty trick on me. I have money, a lot of money. These are just some temporary difficulties. Lend me some to pay. We'll go back tomorrow and I'll pay you back double." Sophia pulled away and looked at Dan with contempt. She realized she had come to a resort with a broke con artist who was facing legal trouble. "Are you crazy? Where am I supposed to get money? You invited me on vacation and now you want me to pay. You're pathetic." Sophia grabbed her purse and went to the room to pack, leaving Dan alone in the middle of the restaurant under the stares of the other diners and the watchful eyes of security. Dan didn't return to his luxurious villa that night. He was detained at reception to resolve the debt. He had to call everyone he knew trying to borrow money from friends to coworkers, but everyone avoided him as Kevin and I had made sure to spread the rumor that Dan had a gambling problem and was drowning in debt. Dan was at a dead end, in the very paradise he had built for himself. A bitter end for a traitor. After giving the ultimatum to my in-laws and freezing Dan's accounts, I spent the afternoon organizing his home office. I wanted to find any important documents related to his assets to prepare for the legal battle ahead. That office had always been his inviolable territory. He constantly claimed to be busy and needed concentration, forbidding me and the cleaning lady from entering to clean. I put on gloves and started with the bottom drawers of his massive oak desk. Piles of old documents, expense reports from years ago, all covered in dust. In the farthest corner, I found a small cardboard box. Inside was an old smartphone that Dan had stopped using 2 years ago because the screen was shattered. I remembered he said then that the motherboard had fried and he had thrown it away. But my professional marketing intuition told me data is gold. I took the phone to the living room and plugged it in to charge. 15 minutes later, the screen with its spider web of cracks lit up. Fortunately, the phone still worked, though the touchscreen was difficult to use. I patiently started trying passwords. His birthday, no. Our wedding anniversary, also no. His mother's birthday, again, nothing. Suddenly, I remembered Sophia's birthday, which I had seen in the documents. I entered the combination of her day, month, and year of birth. The phone unlocked. My heart sank. It turned out they were already together 2 years ago when this phone was still in use. And all that time I had been living in a sweet lie, trusting him completely. I went into the voice recorder app. Dan had a habit of recording meetings or instructions from his bosses. But among the boring work files was a recording titled Future Plan, over 30 minutes long. The creation date was 6 months ago. He had probably synced the data from the cloud, or used this phone for discretion. I pressed play. Dan's familiar voice came on, but the tone was completely different. Not serious as usual, but casual and calculating. He was talking to another man, apparently a drinking buddy. "Don't sweat it, man. I've got it all figured out," Dan bragged in the recording. "My dumbass wife has no clue. All she knows is how to work like a mule and be in the kitchen. I'm bringing my old folks from upstate. I'll tell her I'm going to Frankfurt for 4 years and that she has to take care of them. You know my mom. She's got a temper like you wouldn't believe. She's going to bleed my wife dry." The other man laughed heartily. "And you? Are you really going to Germany?" Dan chuckled. "What Germany? I took a vacation, scraped together the cash, and I'm taking my Sophia to a resort. When I get back, I'll pick a fight over anything and file for divorce. By then, all the assets will be siphoned off. Emily will be left with nothing. I'm going to use these 4 years to turn her into a free maid. I'll squeeze her for everything she's worth and then kick her to the curb, and then officially, I'll bring Sophia in. With money and a settled life." The recording ended with the clinking of glasses. I sat on the sofa, clutching the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. The initial pain gave way to infinite disgust. I wasn't just a betrayed wife. I was a pawn in his cruel plan. He considered me a fool, a free maid. He wanted to use me and discard me. The tears no longer flowed. Hatred had dried them up. I copied the audio file to my computer. I sent a copy to Mr. Harrison and saved another in 3 different cloud storage services. It was irrefutable proof of his moral degradation and a conspiracy to misappropriate assets. With this recording, the judge would see our marriage in a different light. I looked out the window. Another summer storm was breaking over New York. The drops hit the glass, furiously, echoing the tempest in my soul. "Dan, you underestimated me so much. You thought I was a sheep you could lead on a leash, but you forgot that a cornered sheep can take down its enemy." I turned off the living room light and went to my bedroom in a completely new state of mind. Tomorrow would be a long day, and I held in my hands the sharpest weapon to end this show. The next morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual to prepare for the weekly meeting. Work was in full swing when a commotion erupted in the building's lobby. The receptionist called me, her voice trembling with nerves. "Emily, please come down. There's an older woman here who says she's your mother-in-law and she's making a huge scene. She's unfurled a banner. She's screaming. She's demanding to see you. Security can't handle her. She's throwing herself on the floor and yelling." I frowned, setting aside my documents. Patricia, of course, wasn't going to sit back. She had decided to resort to an old trick, public humiliation, to shame me in front of my colleagues, scare me, and get me to withdraw the lawsuit. I adjusted my jacket, reapplied my lipstick to look even more confident, and calmly took the elevator down to the first floor. The elevator doors opened to a chaotic scene. Patricia, in an old brown dress and with her hair disheveled, was sitting on the floor in the center of the lobby. In her hands, she held a cardboard sign with a clumsily written inscription, "Wayward daughter-in-law cheats on husband and throws his parents onto the street." A crowd of employees from different companies had gathered around her. Everyone was recording with their phones. Seeing me, Patricia jumped up and lunged at me, trying to grab my hair, but 2 security guards stopped her. She started screaming, her shrill voice echoing through the marble lobby. "Good people, look at this director. Her husband works himself to the bone to support her. And she's here messing around with other men and then throws his old sick parents out onto the street in the rain. Shameless. Give my son his house. Back." The crowd began to murmur. Suspicious glances were cast my way. In our society, accusations of infidelity and disrespect for the elderly are the most serious for a woman. Patricia knew this perfectly well and was attacking my most vulnerable point, my reputation. I stood motionless, my back straight, showing no fear or shame. I gestured for security to step aside. I took my phone out of my bag and connected it to a portable speaker I had asked my assistant to bring down beforehand. I picked up a small microphone. My voice came out loud and clear, drowning out my mother-in-law's screams. "Esteemed colleagues, and you, Mom, I'm very sorry you've chosen this way to resolve our family problems. You say I'm unfaithful and that I've thrown you out on the street. Well, let's give everyone present the opportunity to see the evidence and decide who is the unfaithful one and the swindler." I held up my phone and played yesterday's audio recording. Dan's loud voice echoed through the lobby, clearly articulating every word of his plan to deceive his wife, divert the assets, and use his parents as a tool to hold his daughter-in-law captive. Then I projected onto the large screen in the lobby, which I had asked the technicians to connect beforehand, the photos of Dan and Sophia embracing in Miami, as well as the bank statements of the thousands of dollars transferred to his mistress. The crowd fell silent. Then, the whispers resumed, but in a different direction. The accusatory looks were now directed at Patricia. It turns out her son is the one cheating. My God, what a scumbag husband. He cheated on his wife and ran off with his mistress. And the old lady, what nerve, she knows her son is the guilty one and still comes to make a scene. Patricia, hearing her son's voice and seeing his photos with another woman on a giant screen, turned whiter than a sheet. She froze. The cardboard sign fell from her hands. All her aggression evaporated, replaced by bewilderment and a searing shame. She hadn't expected me to be so well prepared and to deliver such a devastating blow. I approached her and said in a low but firm voice, "Go home, Mom. Don't embarrass yourself any further. Your son is currently a broke man in Miami and will soon be facing a lawsuit. You'd be better off going and packing your things. My offer still stands. In 3 days, I ask you to vacate my apartment." With that, I apologized to everyone for the disturbance and asked security to escort Patricia to the exit. She left with her head down under disapproving stares, hunched over, and suddenly aged. Her attempt at public humiliation had backfired, putting a final end to my relationship with my husband's family. Back in my office, I closed the door and allowed myself 10 minutes of silence. I needed total concentration for the next step. Dan's finances were cut off. My mother-in-law was humiliated. It was time to deal with the root cause, his mistress, Sophia. Through Kevin's contacts, I got the phone number of Sophia's father, who lived in a small town in Georgia. According to Kevin's information, Sophia's family were decent people. The father, a retired high school teacher. The mother, a part-time cashier at the local grocery store. Simple, honest people who valued their reputation and were very proud of their daughter, who had made it big in the Yem City. They surely didn't know their daughter was the mistress tearing a family apart. I sat in my car, rolling up the windows to ensure maximum confidentiality. I took a deep breath and dialed the number. On the third ring, a male voice with a characteristic southern drawl sounding friendly and folksy answered. "Hello, who's this?" I made my voice as soft and polite as possible, but maintained the necessary seriousness. "Good morning. I'm sorry to bother you. My name is Emily. I'm Daniel Miller's wife. I'm calling about an important matter concerning your daughter Sophia." There was silence on the other end of the line. I supposed the father was trying to remember who Dan was. Then his voice brightened. "Oh, Daniel, my Sophia's boyfriend." "Yes, she's told me about him. Has something happened? Did you two have a fight?" I sighed inwardly. As expected, Sophia had lied to her parents. I began to explain slowly and clearly. Each of my words was a blow to a father's pride. "I'm afraid you don't know the whole truth. Daniel is my legal husband. We've been married for 7 years and live in New York. Your daughter is having an affair with my husband, and right now they are on vacation together in Miami." The father's voice on the other end of the phone trembled. "What? What are you saying?" "My Sophia told me Daniel was single, a senior executive, and that they were going to get married." "You must have the wrong number." I remained calm. No, I haven't made a mistake. In fact, Sophia is pregnant with my husband's child. But I'm not calling to argue, but to inform you of something more urgent. My husband is under investigation for fraud and embezzlement. His accounts have been frozen. He is bankrupt. Sophia, by being with him, could be considered an accomplice if the investigation expands. I paused, giving him time to process the information. I could hear his heavy breathing. I could hear his wife in the background asking, "Who is it?" And him shushing her. "I know you're a teacher, that you're a decent family. I don't want to air dirty laundry or embarrass you in front of your neighbors. I just hope you'll call Sophia and convince her to come to her senses before it's too late. Daniel is not the millionaire he pretends to be. He's facing jail time. If Sophia stays with him, she will ruin her life." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then I heard his trembling, restrained voice. "Thank you. Thank you for letting me know. I did not raise my daughter this way. I will call her right now. Please forgive us. Forgive us." He hung up. I lowered the phone, feeling a pang of remorse. I didn't want to hurt an old man, but it was an extreme measure. I had to cut off all of Dan and Sophia's escape routes. When her parents knew the truth, they would force her to come back. And when she understood that Dan was not only broke but a future convict and under pressure from her family, there would be no room left for their illicit love and her pregnancy. This call wasn't just a psychological blow to Sophia, but a way to help her get out of the mud before it was too late, even if my motive was dictated by self-preservation. The 3 days passed in a flash. As I expected, my in-laws barricaded themselves in the apartment, with no intention of leaving. They were convinced I was just scaring them, that in America, no daughter-in-law would dare to kick out her husband's parents for fear of public opinion and accusations of disrespect. But they were wrong. The Emily I had been died the day Dan got on that plane. On the morning of the 4th day, I took the day off from work. I didn't come alone, but with a city marshal and 2 representatives from the building's management. We stood in front of the apartment door. I rang the bell. Silence, though I could hear the sound of the TV on inside. I rang again, and then held my keycard to the lock, but the door was chained from the inside. From the other side of the door, George's defiant voice came through. "Don't even try. I've changed the locks. Let's see you kick us out now. My son bought this house. I have a right to live here." I nodded to the marshal. He turned on a camera to record what was happening. I said loudly but calmly toward the door, "Dad, I gave you 3 days, but you refused to cooperate. This condo is my and Dan's property. In his absence, I am the only legal owner present. Your illegal occupation of the residence and changing the locks are a violation of the law. Today, I have invited a city marshal and building management to witness the repossession of my home. If you do not open the door, I will be forced to call a locksmith to break the lock, and security personnel will enter to carry out a forced eviction." From inside, silence. I signaled to the locksmith. The screech of a drill was heard. 5 minutes later, the lock was open. In the living room, sitting on the sofa and huddled together, were George and Patricia. Their faces were white with terror when they saw the uniformed officers enter. They tried to shout, but seeing the camera pointed at them and the stern faces of the guards, they were intimidated. I pointed to a stack of cardboard boxes I had prepared. "I've hired a moving company. They will help you pack your personal effects. Please take only your clothes and personal items. Any property belonging to the apartment, television, refrigerator, decorative items will remain here. All your actions are being recorded." The movers worked quickly. Clothes, medications, small objects, everything went into the boxes in an instant. Patricia cried and cursed me, calling me a shameless, evil daughter-in-law. I let it all wash over me. I stood with my arms crossed, observing the process. When the last box was sealed, I handed George an envelope and a piece of paper with an address. "Dad. Mom. Despite your attitude toward me, I retain one last shred of respect. This is the address of an affordable motel 2 miles from here. I've paid for a room for 1 week. You can stay there until Dan returns or until you go back upstate. And here's $200 for food. As of this moment, I am absolved of all obligation to support you in this apartment." George, trembling with rage, took the envelope and stuffed it in his pocket. He shot me one last look of hatred and dragged Patricia behind him. "You'll pay for this, you snake." I watched their backs disappear down the hall and felt an immense relief. I asked the locksmith to change all the locks to the most modern ones with fingerprint access and to erase all old data. The chime of the new lock sounded like a bell announcing the beginning of a new chapter in my life. The apartment was empty, but now it was clean and secure. I had reclaimed my territory. While I was setting things right in New York and Miami, Dan was living through the most terrible hours of his life. After being kicked out of the hotel and Sophia running away, he was left alone on the street with a couple of $100 in his pocket and his cards blocked. He tried calling Sophia, but her phone was off. He called his parents and learned they had just been kicked out of the house and were in a miserable motel. Dan realized he had lost everything. He had to get back to New York. But with what money would he buy a ticket? The one-way business class ticket had been bought with a credit card that was now useless. He made his way to downtown Miami and found a pawn shop. He took off his Rolex Submariner, which he had bought for $40,000, his pride and joy. "How much will you give me for this?" "It's authentic, almost new." The pawn shop owner, after examining the watch with a loupe, smirked. "The watch is authentic, yes, but you have no box or papers. For something like this, I can give you what you'd get for something stolen. $5,000 cash on the spot." Dan was stunned. "Are you kidding me? It cost me $40,000. The papers are in New York. Give me at least $20,000. The owner waved his hand. "No papers, unknown origin. $5,000 is my final offer." Hungry, soaked, and penniless Dan, clenching his teeth, accepted. Holding the wad of cash, he felt an immense bitterness. Just a couple of days ago, that amount was the price of a dinner for him. Now, it was his only salvation. He bought a ticket in the last row of economy class. The flight was delayed 3 hours. He sat in the waiting area, watching happy couples, and his heart ached. He remembered how proudly he had walked out of this airport a few days ago, and looked at himself now unshaven in wrinkled clothes. On the plane, he was squeezed between two large men. Children were crying in the cabin. Instead of steak and wine, he was given a dry sandwich and a bottle of water. The plane landed at JFK in a torrential downpour. He took an old taxi into the city. New York seemed gray and cold. He knew the real storm was not waiting for him outside, but at home in the apartment where he was once the master. The journey from paradise to the hell he so deserved was over. The taxi dropped Dan in a dark alley somewhere in the outer boroughs. He stood in front of the address I had left for his parents. The Corner Motel, a dilapidated building with a noisy bar on the ground floor. A stale smell hit him as he entered. He asked the owner where George and Patricia were staying. She sized him up with a disdainful look and pointed to the 3rd floor. Climbing the dark staircase, he heard his mother's cries. He pushed open the door. A 150-square-foot room, an old bed, a plastic wardrobe. His father was smoking in a corner. His mother was crying with her back to the wall. Seeing her son, Patricia jumped up and rushed to him. "Son, you're back. Look what your wife has done to us. She's thrown us out on the street into this hole. You have to teach her a lesson. Get our house back." Dan pushed his mother away and sat on the edge of the bed. He looked at the miserable room, at his aged parents. Rage, shame, and helplessness washed over him. George asked angrily, "How is Germany? What's going on that your wife has rebelled at home? She says you were with some girl in Miami that she's shown pictures to everyone. Is it true?" Dan hung his head. His silence was the answer. Patricia froze. "So it's true. You lied to all of us." Dan exploded. "Yes, it's true. I had it all planned out, but I didn't expect Emily to be such a bitch. She's blocked everything. She's filed a police report. Now I'm a nobody." Furious, George threw his cigarette butt. "You're a fool, son. You had a good wife, a house, and you traded it all for some floozy. Now you have no house, no money, no honor." At that moment, Dan's phone buzzed. It was an email from the HR department. He opened it. The subject line read, "Notice of termination and claim for damages." The email explained that the company had received evidence of his vacation fraud and had also discovered that over the past 2 years, he had misappropriated $50,000 by falsifying expense reports. The company demanded the return of the money within 15 days, or the case would be referred to the courts. The phone fell from his hands. He sat there petrified. It was the end. Not just the wife, the house, and the money, but now also his career and the threat of prison. "They've fired me," he whispered. "They're demanding $50,000. Emily. It was all Emily. She wants to destroy me." Hearing the word prison, Patricia fainted. Chaos erupted in the small room. Dan curled up in a corner. For the first time in his life, he felt a real, chilling fear of the future. A week later, Sophia called me. She begged me to meet. I agreed. She arrived at the coffee shop, exhausted, pale, looking nothing like the glamorous girl in the photo. She placed an envelope of cash on the table. Here's $50,000. It's the last of the money he transferred to me. I spent the rest. Please take it. My parents told me they won't let me come home until I've paid it all back. She showed me a hospital report, and I terminated the pregnancy. I can't have a child with a man like that. He lied to me. He lied to you. I was so stupid. I felt sorry for her. She was a victim too. I'll take the money. I'll deduct it from his debt. What you've done is your decision. Just remember you can't build your happiness on someone else's misfortune. She burst into tears. I left her alone with her regret. A month later on a rainy afternoon, Dan waited for me outside my office. He looked like a vagrant, wet, unshaven. He knelt before me in a puddle. Emily, forgive me. I was wrong. It was all Sophia's fault. She bewitched me. I've lost everything. Forgive me. Come back to me. Give me a chance. I looked at him with contempt. Get up. Don't humiliate yourself further. It was your choice. Sophia gave me the money back. She has more of a conscience than you do. Hearing about the money, his eyes lit up with greed. So you have money. Help me pay back the company. I shook my head and walked away. Figure it out yourself. I'll see you in court. I got into my warm, dry car and drove off, leaving him crying in the rain. The day of the trial, I was calm and confident. Dan sat alone, head down without a lawyer. He tried to mumble something about failed investments, but my evidence, the bank statements, and above all, that audio recording left him no chance. The court ruled divorce, granted the condo and car were my property, as the origin of the funds was proven. Dan was ordered to repay me the remaining $50,000 he had diverted from our shared assets. I walked out of the courtroom a victor. I was free. 2 years later, I'm sitting in a sky bar atop a skyscraper in Chicago. I'm drinking wine and looking out at the city lights. After the divorce, I sold that condo, moved to Chicago, and became the regional director for a large multinational corporation. I've built a brilliant career. I've become even more beautiful and self-assured. I get a message from Kevin. Emily, you won't guess who I just ran into. I ordered an Uber, and the driver was Dan. He sends a photo. In the driver's seat, a thin, sun-weathered man in a rideshare service uniform. He looks terrible. He recognized me, Kevin wrote. He got all nervous, didn't say a word the whole trip. They say he's still renting, working himself to death to pay off his debts. His parents went back upstate. His mom had a heart attack and is bedridden, and his dad drinks. Karma. I looked at the photo without any emotion. It was the price of his choice. I put the phone down. An elegant man sat down next to me. Andrew, my partner, who had been insistently courting me for 6 months. What are you thinking about? He asked, softly placing a drink in front of me. I smiled. About the past. But it's in the past now. He raised his glass. To our bright future. We clinked glasses. The sound was cheerful. To a new, free, and happy life. The story of my old marriage had ended, opening the blank pages of a new book, one of which I was now the author.